Okay. Hello, go live. I think we are live. Okay. Yes, we are live. Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Cheers to Justin. Thank you for being here. Woo. This is what we do now this is like our first date on live. Got to cheers and buy my own drink and everything. How are you?
It's good. Great. It's good to see you. I'm back in Indiana I was in New York for a bit and doing okay. We're gearing up for the school year here. So.
Oh, amazing. So have you, on that note, are we going to have children or students, university, whatever level, going back to school in a physical building? Is that what you're thinking of, or is that what's happening?
Yeah, so the different campuses are taking on different approaches. It's academics are at the university level. People are a little bit worried. So our campus is doing a hybrid model. So some classes online, some in person. It'll be a bit of a mix. But the interesting piece of that whole conversation is the part that is missing is we're not often talking about human behavior. So when we think about colleges coming back and students being here, there's an assumption that they're going to wear masks and be careful. And what we know as a researcher scientist, what we know is that when you're around college age, the brain is primed for more risk-taking behavior. People are engaging in sex, they're dating, they're looking for romantic partners, they're using alcohol and other drugs. So it's a precarious situation, I think, for universities right now, because that age group is the one that you expect risky behavior.
Absolutely. And to that note, how has the pandemic affected your business and personal life? And we can go in any order. You and I had a little conversation just before about your parents staying with you. So that's got to be different. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was so on a personal level. It was so you and I were both in New York a few months ago, and just as everything happened, I drove back with both my parents, and they stayed with me. They quarantined with me here in Indiana for 3 months, and it was a blast. Actually, we had a lot of fun. It was occasionally I felt like I was in high school again, but I got a little too used to, I think, working all day and then having dinner prepared for me every night. I got a little spoiled.
Yeah. Would you have thought ever that your parents would be living with you for 3 entire months as an adult? I mean, you're still their child, but you're a full grown man.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's for all of us, right? It's so much of this interesting moment where we're thinking about how do we have our normal social lives, or where do we when you're an adult, there's a lot I actually tell my parents, but there's certain things I don't necessarily about my intimate life or who I'm talking to, or
absolutely.
And I think it's just so different. It's one of the reasons we did our big sex and relationships in the time of COVID study to see what's going on in people's lives.
I want to hear about that. Okay, so where did you do the study, and what are you able to share about that? And you're talking specifically about sex during the pandemic and COVID in the dating scenario. Okay, I'm all ears, and I'm sure everybody here is listening. Go ahead.
We're ready. So we, with 3 of my colleagues, Amanda Gesselman, Kristen Mark, and Justin LaMiller, at the Kinsey Institute, we launched a study looking at people's romantic and sexual lives during the pandemic. And in some ways, it's what we call a naturalistic experiment. When something happens, how can we sort of rapidly try and measure what goes on during that time? And what we found that was interesting was the first paper just came out, and we looked at people's sexual lives. And early on, a lot of reporters called and they said, so is everyone going to be home with their boo now and having a ton of sex? And we thought, well, that's a nice idea, but probably not, especially because if you're stressed around the world around you, and you're worried, and you're and the body is in a state of fear, that's not really great for intimate connection. It's not great for dating, and whether you're using your online dating or you're trying to connect with people, it's not really great for sex either. And the example I like to use is in the natural world, we don't see 2 gazelle mating in front of a lion. So if you're in the sweat response, you don't usually say, all right, let's start courtship. Let's get to know each other. So what we found was actually that overall people's sexual lives, they reported a decrease in the quality of their sexual life. Most people, and this is in a multinational study.
And we're talking like across the board.
Mhm.
And the Kinsey Institute does research in specifically on human behavior. We haven't even talked about that, but this is a study specifically about sex, and it's multi-ethnic, not cross country, but multiple regions. Okay, got it.
Yeah,
Very comprehensive.
Yeah, we have people from all over the globe and different ages and different psychological profiles, biological profiles. And what we found is that across all those different demographics, that on average, people reported a decline in the quality of their sexual life. And then we said, okay, what about the frequency of the behavior? And people also reported a decline in the frequency of sexual behavior. So the quality had gone down, and the frequency with which they had sex had gone down since the pandemic began.
Did you survey me? Is that what?
I'm not allowed to say. I can't.
I'm kidding.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
And we then asked about the behaviors that they engaged in. Here was the interesting, the sort of twist. So although the the frequency went down and the quality went down, people reported introducing more new behaviors into their repertoires. So they were expanding their sexual repertoires during the pandemic. Mostly things like sexting and sending images, but also things like talking about your fantasies with partners. So, and those people that did expand their repertoires were much more likely to actually report that their sex life had stayed the same or even improved a little bit. So some people were using it as an opportunity to turn in towards dating or romantic.
Sure. Overall, if we were to give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, sex has been affected, and it's been a thumbs down during pandemic. Okay, overall, we got the thumbs down. That being said, congratulations on your new appointment. Yay, everyone. Oh my gosh. Describe your role as the executive director for the Kinsey Institute. Does that mean everybody gets to do and study what you want to study?
It's a tremendous honor. So the Kinsey Institute has been for almost 75. We'll celebrate our 75th anniversary in 2022. So for nearly 3/4 of a century, it's been the world's premier sex and research institute. And it's primarily scientists that study different aspects of sexuality. And over the last few years in particular, and my own work is also on relationships. So we look at sex and relationship context and dating and intimacy and close connection, and both the biology and the sociology of that. So we have this research team. We have 14 faculty at the moment, often tied sociologists, psychologists, anthropologists, biologists. And we've also got a collection. So the Kinsey collection of art, artifacts, and materials, it's a library and special collection, is the largest research collection of sexual materials in the world. So now,
can you expand on sexual materials? Are we talking physical things? Tell me about that.
It's everything. So we've got, in some cases, it's archives, it's diaries. We have correspondence between Dr. Kinsey himself and people like Freud. And then we've got a fine art collection. We've got a wonderful curator, Rebecca Fassman, who manages our fine art collection. And then we have a fantastic head of collections, Liana Zhao, and she oversees the archives and the materials. So we've got a little bit of everything of art and artifacts. And I was just talking to someone the other day about we've got what are called Moche Sex Pots, and they are a pre-Columbian South American pottery, and that from the Moche, and they depict aspects of sexuality on them. And what was interesting is when anthropologists first looked at them, they said, "Oh, these are people. These are men and women having sex." And it wasn't until years later that younger anthropologists looked at them and said, "Well, yeah, but they were men having sex with men, women having sex with women." And it was a great example of our biases sometimes, that we don't see what's right in front of us. We interpret it differently at different points in time.
What, and going back to that, what would be the date of those sex pots, given that, it was LGBT, this was going on from way before, right? So when would that time frame be?
Oh gosh, you stumped me on that one. I forget the exact time. I don't want to say it because if I get it wrong, it's bad.
Oh
But
no, is it like early 19th century? Do you think, like, or could we be
I think
talking
if I remember
1800s?
correctly, they're a few hundred years old. So there's we've got materials that span 2,000 years of human
Wow,
history.
that is so
Mhm,
great.
mhm.
And we talk about couples. A lot of couples are
Yeah.
experiencing
Oh,
unexpected breakups. Relationships are being tested, and we don't need to even. Your stats are showing that sex is down,
yeah.
connection is challenging. What advice can you share with these couples to help come to an understanding? Did your research talk about why sex was down? Did it talk
Mhm.
about why they were turned off
Yeah.
from sex, or why things were different and they started to look at other options?
Yeah. That's a great question, and I'm so curious. I'll jump in, and then I want to hear what you think because
Okay.
you're the expert on a lot of this stuff. So, so I think there's a few issues going on with relationship dissolution right now, and one is it's a tough time on people, and in fact, people who trauma psychologists will often tell you after a pretty intense event, don't make a big life decision for a few months, for 3 to 6 months. And what I think is really interesting
Mm.
is for a lot of people, this is a pretty massive life event. If you've got kids right now, I mean, especially single parents, we don't know about the sex lives of single parents.
I have three at home and a dog, so
I don't know. You look great. How the hell did you pull that up? I mean, so there's ways,
thank you.
that's
Thank you.
really hard, right? That's a
Yeah.
hard moment. And so I think when we think about how people are managing, if you're in an area that you've maybe suffered job loss, or if you've or just dealing with having kids at home, there's a lot to deal with, and that becomes a difficult time for relationships. And the challenge right now is we're under stress. Whether we're under stress because you lost your own job and you've got these kids, or you're under stress because it's just everything around you, right? It's you can't
You have your parents living at home. You have no privacy.
exactly, right.
Yeah.
Maybe you just can't get your cleaner in, or any number of
Sure.
issues that are stressful right now. That becomes embodied, and that makes it when our nervous system is that stressed, or we're worried, or we even feel threatened. Social behavior becomes problematic, and intimate connection becomes really problematic. So our relationships can suffer. So I think the challenge right now is, well, do we take this moment and do we lean in towards our partners? Do we say, hey, let's get through this together? Or do we have it and maybe unintentionally bottle it up and then express it towards our partners? So I think the issue with people breaking up right now is a lot of people are really stressed. A lot of people
Right.
are just getting way too much of their partner right now. Um,
That's
more
why I'm
than-
going to Vancouver next week. Yeah, it's funny. You actually messaged me and said, this is the longest time you've ever been home for any length
Yeah.
of time. So, for somebody like myself, it almost feels like you're in this cage and you got to get out, right?
Yeah.
So interesting.
I don't think I've never traveled. We both travel a lot for work. I don't think I've not gone this long without traveling. And it was
Correct.
6 months ago. I said to a good friend of mine, I said, I'm getting sick of all this travel. I'm on a plane all the time, and now I'm itching.
What you say. Yeah. Well, your research focuses on the evolutionary foundations and variation in courtship,
Mhm.
intimacy, and sexual behavior. Is there a trend in dating that we should know about? You may have talked about it already in your COVID study.
Mhm.
Outside of that, is there something that's changing in the dating landscape that we should know about?
Yeah. And then remind me about breakups. I want to get back to something. Something you said just reminded me. So one of the things we know, so in the study we do with Match.com, I've been their scientific advisor since 2010, is we do a big study called Singles in America, my colleague Helen Fisher. And we try and look at single Americans. So what's interesting is there are more single adults in the United States today, throughout most of North America, but particularly in the United States, we know over 100 million single adults, over a third of the adult population, people moving in and out of romantic and sexual relationships. That's more than most industrialized societies, but that's a pattern we're starting to see in the US and the UK, in Canada and Japan. Japan and the US have some of the highest numbers. So we're seeing more single adults and people on the dating market. So when we think about what these patterns are that are changing, one is, I think, the use of technology in our search in our courtship process. So we know that more people use the internet in the broadest sense, whether that's a dating site, a professional matchmaker, a website connection. So the internet broadly and facilitating connections has become the most common way for people to meet. And that's something that's radically different from what our species has done. So for millions of years, we connected with people in small groups, and our people, right? They knew that your parents knew, your cousins knew, your aunt who was the matchmaker knew, right? We had people in our lives facilitate our courtship connections, and that's by and large changed. I think that's one of the biggest ones, is the role of technology in the courtship process.
Yeah, interesting, because I remember attending conferences 10 years ago when this wasn't even a thing. Like this, we didn't have a swipe. Tinder changed the game entirely.
Yeah.
And now if you're not on a dating app and you're single and you don't have one, it's like you're going to rely on old school ways of like meeting at the grocery store. So you are seeing that trend that more connections today are shifting to some kind of a virtual or technological assistance to do that.
Exactly. But that's a trend we've been monitoring for 10 years now. So we've been, for every year, and the number just keeps going up. So what's interesting about the pandemic is, I think, technology is really important now. We're doing these Zoom interactions. You and I have a cocktail somewhere right now.
Yes. Well, I'm having a cocktail by myself. Well, I am a matchmaker. We've talked about that, and there are still so many singles, and I'll particularly say entrepreneurs and executives that are so resistant to being online.
Yeah.
Do you feel to a degree there is a large disadvantage for someone in today's society and going what we're going through to not be utilizing technology as a method of meeting? Is that not an avenue that actually is helping somebody? Talk to me about that, because I end up having to never want to convince someone you should try this and be totally uncomfortable, Justin, but people don't, many entrepreneurs and people who value privacy. I would just like to speak to you from having been the research scientist at Match.com and maybe being privy to what the kinds of people that use a dating site. Has that not changed? Are you seeing more professionals and successful individuals and entrepreneurs gravitating to a dating site? And for those who are not comfortable, is there anything that you can speak to that might help that process? Or do you think that's fine, you don't need to use it?
Yeah, I think it's a really complicated question, because I think what we know is the bottom line is that the internet has become the most common way to meet someone. So overall, now you're talking about particular groups, which are more complicated, but overall,
I would say working professionals or anybody that's kind of like, you don't even have to be a professional to think, I don't want to do this online dating thing. I don't want to put myself out there. And yet statistics will share. And as you said, the trend is that it's on the rise.
Yeah. So if becomes the context of where you're meeting people. So we know, so for instance, well over 30%, I think it was, I remember the exact number, it was 40% of people have met their 42% most recent first date through an internet source. Whereas
it's a big percentage.
Yeah, 6% met at a bar, right? And so we think that those are the sources. We could say, to your question, right? You could say, okay, you're a busy professional. I don't want to get on the app and put all my information, but I'll go to a happy hour after work, and I will eventually meet someone. But the reality is, when we look at the data, people aren't meeting that way.
It's so funny. I could say, you can go to the bar, but there's a 94% failure rate.
Yes, exactly.
Right? I mean, no offense to all my bar owner friends. I love you, but we go to the bar to enjoy the ambiance and enjoy the food. But research is saying that there's less likelihood that you're actually going to make that connection.
Yeah, you're better off walking in with someone and enjoying this sort of space. And
and leaving with another couple. We'll get to that too.
Yeah, and I think there's so much. Particularly for people who are young professionals. And there's a couple of issues. One issue particularly if you're an executive or a young professional and you're doing quite well in your career, we also know that that can change the way that you see the world. So there was an experiment done, one of my favorite experiments, where they brought a guy into the lab and he played a computer simulation. And there was what's called a confederate. There was an actor in the corner. And she asked a few questions, what time it is. And so they're playing this computer simulation. And when they're losing, afterwards, the researchers ask them about ask a few questions. And they go, well, is there anyone in the room with you? And they'll say, yeah, I think there was someone, she was saying something. Just want to know the time. Now, when they're winning the computer game and they have a sense of power and an authority, they come out and the researchers ask the same questions. They go, well, was there anyone else in the room with you? And they go, yeah, there was a woman. I think she was flirting with me. And so what it suggests is that when we see people who are high status or celebrities or CEOs, and they often see the world a little bit differently, right? They often see the interactions that they have. I think that's part of the reason why a lot get in trouble in business environments. They see interactions as being flirtatious that aren't. It's what we call sexual misperception bias. And so there's some of that going on. So sometimes we also have to think of these people, the CEOs, the celebrities, the young professionals, and I think have people that can help them, whether it's a matchmaker, whether it's a good friend, whether it's their parents, and say, reality check time. If you're looking for a partner, these are things you got to do. You either got to get on an app, you got to talk to someone who's going to help you, and you might be seeing the world in ways that that aren't entirely true. And the problem is, if you see that, you see all these opportunities, and they're not really there. So how do you really focus your energy on the opportunities that are realistic?
Right. I love that. And I come from the philosophy that when it comes to dating, you want to adopt the diversified portfolio. Mm-hmm. You don't put your eggs in one basket. Yeah. Now, moving to a little sensitive topic, there seems to be a lot of racial biases in mate selection on dating apps. It actually happens in real life, and we're right in the middle of a movement. Yeah. Can you speak about this topic as an expert and from your research with Match.com? I'm going to make it a two-part question because I've learned and you've shared Asian men and Black women specifically, statistically on dating sites, get the least number of swipes and messages. Yeah. And as an expert, what can I do? I'm a matchmaker to address this issue, starting from education. Like this might be really heavy for you. I'm like, oh no, but I really would like to speak first about the racial biases and then address the specific racial biases. So I know you come with a lot of information that can help enlighten us about this issue.
Yeah, and you're right. This is a heavy one. It's a complicated one. And so there are some great. So I take my thinking on this from some great studies by Cynthia Feliciano and Belinda Robnett, two professors in the University of California system who've done a lot on online dating, and sociologists, and looking at some of these racial biases. And one of the things that their studies have shown, so they create fake profiles, basically, and they've done studies not tethered to a particular company. So they show that there are these racial biases. So what happens is the racial biases that exist anyway play out in these dating sites and these dating interactions. So people tend to, for instance, think of Black men as being more aggressive and Asian men as being more feminine, Latino men as being more sexual. So we know that there are these ideas that play out, and they can pose problems for people who are dating. And there are different categories that struggle. Same with education, actually. As women who are highly educated really often struggle on the dating market. And in this case, for race, which is the current moment that we're importantly addressing, I think it's really complicated. And I'm a little bit dancing around giving a direct answer because
I mean, no, there's no right or wrong. I want to have an insight.
Yeah.
Also personal opinion. I mean, I have an opinion, and of course, every day, Justin, I have singles who come to me with their, I want to call it reasons, justifications, whatever it is why they have a partner preference. And often that partner preference was formed and created out of what they've learned, and to learn to be attracted. You actually are taught even what to be attracted to, including the kinds of foods. If I'm a young person and I was brought up to eat spicy foods or only like these kinds of food, never introduced to anything else, then I'm going to prefer that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really, as a matchmaker as well, I want to create the most opportunity for a single person without, I mean, there's so many considerations. So on the racial preference scenario, I think where it becomes challenging or problematic is when there's a false impression or belief about a person based on, they're being racially profiled, and that doesn't even define or describe who they are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's tough for, we all have preferences. Some of us like someone who's short and tall, or fat or thin, or
Sure.
funny or not. And when it comes to race, those play in. And sometimes they're about particular physical characteristics, skin tone, hair. And I think that's the part. It can be, it's hard to regulate someone's mate preferences. And so I think that part is one issue. And that's the part that I find a little bit unsavory, right? Because I say, if someone says, okay, I really like this type of, if I like Asian men, or I like Black women, and you go, okay, well, it's a little overly restrictive. And as an academic, I often think, I don't like that for all sorts of reasons. On the other hand, we have to take serious that people have preferences. So I think the question then becomes, well, why is it that? So if you have someone who says, for instance, that they only like Asian women, and what is it about?
And I've been confronted with somebody saying that, and it might as well be Polish, or I like Germans, I like Swiss, whatever, right? It doesn't. But to that point, yes, they have this preference for someone.
Yeah, and I think it depends on what is the perception of what that means, right? Is it that you like Asian women, or is it that you have some racialized idea about, power dynamics and submission, and that someone's going to be more accommodating? So I think that's the part that, as someone who dated an Asian woman, that's not always true. We can tell you that, right? And,
well, as a Asian woman, I would say that's not true for me. Exactly. But it is true, Justin. I've had people say as well to that point, and I don't want to isolate a particular culture of people, that you initially had talked about some people misunderstanding or assuming, this race type are aggressive. This race type is narcissistic. This race type are great in bed. Like, that's not true. No. You probably know that that's not true.
No. And what's interesting is
there a study to say who's the best in bed? Like, culturally, can we?
Yeah, so there was a study that looked at the infamous question of race and genital morphology of penis size, and there isn't an effect.
I've seen that one.
There's not a real effect there.
Okay.
So there's too much variation within groups, but
sure.
When it comes to relationships, well, there's two things. One is what social scientists call homogamy. And that's the general pattern that patterns of like marital homogamy is we tend to be interested in people with similar interests. So, for instance, a lot of people will want to date within their own racial or ethnic group, right?
Sure.
And that's why there's a lot of what are called niche dating sites, and niche are like Black People Meet, or
absolutely
Christian Mingle, so sites that are for particular groups. And so there's that pattern. We tend to be drawn to people with similar experiences. So same education, same racial ethnic group, same socioeconomic background. But that's changing. So one of the things we see in our big study that Helen and I do, also with our colleague Amanda Gesselman, with Match, is that we've been tracking partner preferences in a whole bunch of domains, and more people today are open to dating outside their racial groups, their education groups, their ethnicity, their religion, and that's changing. And it's younger people. So millennials are much more
correct.
Open. So there's
and Gen Z is even more open. Yeah. And by the time our alphas are dating, it won't matter. I feel like it won't matter very much.
Yeah.
So when it comes to long-term compatibility and happiness, what should singles be focused on when it comes to finding love? When you think of mate selection, at the end of the day, if you've studied happy couples, if that's even included in your study, what should singles be looking for outside of this, race or height or whatnot? What are the foundational components or values that matter for that?
Yeah. So I often take a biological approach to this, right? By training, I'm a biologist, and I think about behavioral biology, and I think about what makes long-term bonds last. And we know that some of those things are things like someone that makes you feel safe, someone that makes you.
I can attest to that. I know as a woman, if I'm with my partner or any past partner, it was really comforting as a woman to be with somebody that I thought, this person is going to protect me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's a good ingredient for a long-term connection. Now, there's another question about we can have long-term connections. That doesn't mean that passion stays forever. That's another piece of the puzzle. But just feeling connected and safe with someone. And I could think years ago I had a colleague that was just really unpleasant, and I did not at my current university. And I used to think like, oh, I don't even want to be in the office. Oh, I don't even want to be around them. In some way, we were sort of forced to, right? That was sort of the work environment. Now,
That's stressful,
yeah.
right?
And if you have elements of that in a relationship where you don't even realize it, maybe there are parts of someone that you like about them, but you feel like you're on pins and needles. That's not an ingredient for a long-term relationship, not for happiness, not for whatever our measures of success are. So I think someone that you feel safe and comfortable with for the long term is good. One of the things I think that often people who are successful struggle with in a relationship is when you think of someone and you think about, okay, are we compatible? We often get so focused on saying, well, they have a good career, or we have similar interests, or we both like to drive this kind of car, or we both like to vacation, on the beach. So it's great because we'll go away together.
Yeah, yeah.
And what we often don't do enough of is ask, well, how does the person make you feel? Right? How do you feel with that person? Do you feel safe? Do you feel happy? And we can get focused on the what to do with that person. You could say, well, the sex is great. The vacations are great. We like the same things. Oh, we eat the same food. How do you feel when you're at the dinner table with them eating the same food? And those emotional type of connection pieces become really important for long-term connection.
Now, you touched a little bit about trauma, relationship trauma, and what's coming up for me and talking and what you're sharing is that there are human beings, as it sounds like, I don't know about this particular person, that they're just not happy people, period.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when you think about, does that person make you happy or how do you feel? How do you know, or when can you decipher when it's like, that just isn't feeling great, or you're the part of the equation of that relationship that's making it messy or sad, or like it doesn't matter who your partner is, you just need to do that work.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes that's introspective work. Sometimes that's, seeing a psychotherapist or trying other things that can make you feel happy, right? Or maybe you're just a negative person. And there are people like that. I'm not in the business of telling them they're right or wrong, but it is. Yeah. It can be difficult for relationships because we can look at, and I think that's also what's going on with the pandemic, is we can.
Yes.
Things you turn to your partner and you go, everything's bad because you're bad. It's like, no, everything's bad because the world's on fire. And how we think about that piece, I think, is how we think about the people that are important to us, talk to them about the issues that maybe we have, and then say, well, how do we do this together? Mm-hmm. And there's a theory by a psychologist, Arthur Aaron, a relationship scientist at Stony Brook in New York. And what he thinks about is how the individuals become, right? It's what's called the inclusion of other and self. And it's I'm doing this with my hands because when you do it in research, you think of two spheres, and then as individuals, and then as you come together, how much do you overlap? And in the experimental task, people are asked how much they overlap with each other, their partner, and how much are you a we? And I think for relationships, one of the questions to what you're asking is, how do we think about we, right? If you're just unhappy, is it that I'm unhappy or that we're unhappy, that our relationship is bad? Or is it struggling with work, or I've got some other issues, or I'm not happy with my weight? And that absolutely will bleed into relationships. We know that, hundreds of studies. But how do we try and stop that is the difficult part, right?
So it sounds like, as with anybody, communication is obviously the key to unraveling these issues, as well as being insightful and accountable. A lot of times, if you're in the blame game and you're looking just to your partner to provide your happiness, I've always said that that's not their responsibility to make you happy. They're not a professional clown. That's not why they're in the relationship.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah. And what's interesting about that is that we can. So there's a great book by psychologist Eli Finkel at Northwestern. And it's called The All or Nothing Marriage. And Esther Perel also talks about Eli's work and some of her talks. And what he's argued is that like marital relationships or close relationships today, we tend to expect everything of our partner. We want the one person to be who we dump all our emotional needs on, who takes care of us when we're sick, who turns on our passion at night. So I want you to do everything. I want you to cook me.
That sounded so draining. I was just like, oh my God.
And traditionally we had a whole village to do those things, right? The partner was more of this particular context, but now we have these expectations of our partners that are often unrealistic, and particularly singles. One of the challenges we often see with singles who are dating, whether they're on the apps or whether they're in some of our studies, is they have these, when they say, what do you want in a partner? And they have this list, and it's like, oh my gosh, you just described a partner that's your, that's the best sexual partner you've ever had in your life, but they're also your maid and your nanny and your therapist. And that is an unreasonable thing to expect of one human being.
Like it's $100,000. You're writing the check.
Put me on the payroll.
All right. So this is something I'm very curious to know. When dating during the pandemic, do you feel comfortable? Well, do you feel comfortable talking about when it would be appropriate to kiss or have sex during normal dating relationships? Like, I don't know if there's a study of, in long-term relationships, you can wait 30 days. I don't know, not on the first date, whatnot. And of course, during COVID, I'm getting that a lot. A lot of my clients are not sure what's standard. It's shifted so much. Yeah. And of course, our health, and there's different questions that we're asking. Like if it were yourself, Justin, and you were seeing somebody, like, are there certain questions that you would think to ask as it pertains to COVID? And then is a kiss now like getting in bed with somebody?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
I love that. So my in the study we did, the sex and relationship study, I've been so interested in we've done studies on kissing before. We did a study on cross-cultural patterns of kissing, and not everyone does it. We often assume that it's this cornerstone of courtship, but actually it's a minority of societies that engage in erotic kissing. Kissing often happens between a mother and a child, pre-choose food.
So the French kiss is not, or even, the French kiss is the French kiss, but so regular, like normal kissing as we know it in North America, in other parts of the world is like nasty or foreign.
That's exactly right. So at least in the anthropological literature. So if we look at societies and the cross culture, so about,
oh my God, is oral sex even allowed then? Like what? That must be crazy.
Yeah, right. I think it's 44% engaged in kissing, and a lot of people would say things like, "Why would you spit in someone's mouth if you like them?"
Oh my gosh!
Right?
Wow, I'm learning something. I had no idea. I had no idea.
So when we think of this,
I like I'm going to spit in your mouth. I'm just telling you right now.
Great to see you. But I agree with you. And because for us, but that's our cultural context, right? So it's just a reminder.
Very cool.
And I think for right now, though, for COVID, absolutely. We think of, I think for people, so there's a psychological trait that's called disgust response. And we know that some people are tuned up a little bit more than others. They have just, some people get disgusted really easily. And then, like I had a friend, we were at an event, and there was a dinner event, and I remember someone didn't clear their plate. She was like, just move the plate over to me. I was like, I think they're sick. And she's like, it's fine. And, and
I can see probably 17 eyes rolling going, oh my God, that's disgusting.
I know. We just had very different response. And I was like ready to like take the plate and launch it. I was like, just to stop them from eating it. And so we have these different sensitivities, and part of that's going to play out right now. It's going to be more though so than ever, because if you are someone who's got a bit of more of a disgust response, kissing in particular, but I kept bringing up kissing, and my collaborators were like, enough, stop talking about kissing. And I was like, but I think you're right. It is this great question of, if you're going on dates now, how are you doing it? Are you doing a Zoom or a FaceTime date as your first date? Then are you are you going to meet in person, but keep your masks
Well,
on?
is it mandatory where with the state that you're in currently to be wearing a mask in all venues? Because here in Toronto, it is mandatory. You can't shop, you cannot enter any establishment at this point without a mask. Gloves are optional. I do see people wearing gloves, not as much, but definitely it's mandatory to wear a mask. So what's it like
Here
with you?
For here, it's not. It's strongly encouraged, but not. I believe last I checked,
Not enforced. Not enforced.
But certain establishments have been, and it is in certain places like restaurants and things. You have to, but like I was in the grocery store the other day, and there were people without masks. But now more of the stores are starting to say, you can't come in without masks. But we're in the U.S. It's this interesting case because the cities and the states are tussling in some cases of who has jurisdiction to enforce. And there's a political debate. It's become so politicized that it's not really about the science at the moment, more about the politics of mask wearing. And so then those questions become: if it's optional, what do you do on a date? And have you been quarantining? Do you have people that might be at risk?
Does the Kinsey Institute provide ideas for questions to ask in this really weird time? It doesn't seem sexy to ask those questions, but it seems necessary to do your due diligence. And again, somebody might have a discuss response if someone's going to lean in and be like, "Whoa, what are you doing?" Like you should ask permission, right?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think more than ever now is the time to say, do you want to hold hands? Do you want to kiss? People could try to do that anyway, but there's a whole lot that happens in courtship that's what we call nonverbal behavior. So you sense someone's body language, and I think now is the time to be verbal. Just explicitly say, what are your expectations? Have you been around people who are sick?
So in your study, people who were unrelated to each other were still engaging in sex. So there was sex happening during the pandemic, just not as much of it. Correct?
Exactly. Yes, people are still having sexual lives, just on average. And there are some people who had increases, but on average, there is a decrease in the frequency of behaviors. Someone just said Bloomington has a mask mandate that started.
Yeah, started at 5 today. I mean, it's going to happen.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the update. If you're going to Bloomington, put a mask on.
I've had mine on, so I feel the reason I don't pay attention. I just assume we should all have them on all the time.
Yes. So people have a love-hate relationship with online dating. I mean, really do. They come on, they come off. I think statistically, even Match has, I don't know if it was Match Group, but there have been reports saying the average user is online for 3 months and then they leave. They don't stay long for their own reasons.
Yeah.
Can you share some of your own tips and maybe even experiences of how to survive dating during the pandemic as it pertains to an online dating site?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things going on. And one is, and my colleague Helen Fisher did an op-ed on this for the New York Times, was that in some ways people are, for online dating, they're getting to know their partners more than they had traditionally. So if you had asked us a year ago, we would say, only, don't do too many messages with someone and then go and meet them for a cup of coffee, right? And different dating coaches have different ideas on that. Some will say only exchange 3 messages. I personally don't think that's enough. I think because a lot of people it's too soon. But you have a few exchanges, maybe for a day, so then you say, let's meet for a coffee or a cocktail or lunch. And at the current moment, what would happen is you'll connect to someone and you might talk to them for months. And I think we have to leverage technologies and then say, do you want to talk on the phone? Do you want to talk on Zoom or FaceTime or a video chat platform? And that's a lot different. So in 6 months ago, you might have been dating on an app and would meet someone for the first time and are getting to know them. Now you're building the emotional connection. You're texting with the person, you're talking to them, you're getting to know things about them. And in some ways, I think that's interesting because it doesn't force us to just rush on the physical, to just look at when you see someone, you say instantly, is there that chemistry? In one study, 50% of young people kiss someone and knew instantly there was no chemistry. And
so the kiss is kind of the precursor. Like if you're a bad kisser, it's like wah, wah, thumbs down. Now, are you seeing from data since the implementation of these video tools, are people trying that out? Has there been an increase in video usage? And can you talk a little bit about what that looks like? And can attraction actually be built on a video call? Is there any research or tips or ways that you can build attraction on a video platform when for so many people it's just so awkward?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your advice on that.
Yeah, there was a study that I remember that study years ago, because in my personal life, I had been in a long distance relationship, and there was this at the time, and the study came out about having shared experiences even if you're not together. And they used the example of movies. They looked at things like movies and TV shows. So what people can do is, if you have a budding relationship right now, and oh gosh, is it a hard time if you have a budding relationship, you can do things like, say,
I would want to go through the screen and just be like,
yeah, let's put this Netflix series together and we'll talk about it. And even though we might be not hanging out as much or separate for health reasons, it gives us something to connect over. So one of the tricks is that, yeah, we can just connect about our lives and what we both like and how we're similar, but we need things to experience as a couple, right? We need things so whether it's
a bit of that newness,
or,
the newness of something. Like you talk specifically about shared experiences. So if we're doing this together, is that seems to me the reason that works is it's a bit of a bonding exercise.
Absolutely.
Yes?
Yep, that's
okay.
right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So since 2010, you've been the scientific advisor to Match.com.
Mm-hmm.
You also work, do you work alongside Dr. Helen Fisher? Do you often collaborate? Okay.
Yeah. She was actually in the dissertation committee many, many moons ago. So she's been a mentor and a good friend and a collaborator.
Yeah, she's amazing. I've watched her TED Talk. I don't know how many times, I can't count. Can you share with us your findings of dating habits and patterns that we might not have already talked about?
Mm-hmm.
High level?
Yeah,
what
sure.
You see?
Sure. So what we do, the project I do with Match is largely the Singles in America study. So it's the largest study ever done on looking at the attitudes and behaviors of singles in the United States. And we've got 10 years of data now. And every year we look at over 5,000 people. And it's not people on Match. We have done some studies where we look at Match users. We'll survey them. But what we'll do is we use a third-party data collection firm, and we collect data from the U.S. So it's what we call a demographically representative sample. So we have it's based on the census. We had tried to get the similar number of men and women and young and old and race and religion and sexual orientation. So what we've done there is trying to look at what people are experiencing in terms of their dating life. And what we find is that a lot of people are struggling with different aspects of dating. And there's a whole host of reasons. And I don't think it's enough to chalk it up to technology. So a lot of people will say, oh, I don't like dating apps, or, part of it is that we've had radical changes in our social lives over the last few thousands of years, really. And how people are weathering that is difficult. So the idea for the companies like Match and many other relationship companies is, how do we provide, how are there platforms that help people connect? And one of the things with dating sites, I think, and apps that I find really interesting is they're not, one of the things we'll say on the team with Match, and Helen will say all the time, is that they're not dating apps. Is really a misnomer. They're connecting, they're meeting apps. And if you go on a dating app because you're looking for love, you have a total misalignment in what that tool is for. And what those apps do is they help you connect with other people. And then you've got to do the stuff, you've got to do the work, and maybe you need a dating coach, maybe you need a therapist, maybe you need to talk to your friends, maybe you just need to spend some time really looking at it, and you don't need anyone else. But it's just a platform to meet people. Then you've got to use the brain, then you've got to use your own, be who you are, and try and, you got to be real. You have to put on your profile, because otherwise no one's interested in someone who's disingenuous. And if you put up a profile that's not real, it might help you meet someone, but as soon as they realize it's not you, they're going to say, oh, I met this wonderful person who's a liar. And that's not an ingredient to build a relationship with someone.
Or I thought they looked like this, and that's challenging. Yeah. So you've co-authored many books, and your next book is titled The Intimate Animal. Mm-hmm. Can we get a sneak peek of what to expect from this book?
Yeah, and
And how long? I'd love to know the book writing process. I don't know if like you woke up one day and said, "This is my next book," or this was 10 years of like this project that you were gonna get together with. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. So mostly I tend to usually write articles and book chapters. That's my usual academic output. And then I did a book several years ago with my colleague Peter Gray called Evolution in Human Sexual Behavior with Harvard Press, which was also an academic book. So with this one, with The Intimate Animal, it's a trade book. So it's meant for a wide audience. It's been a few years in the making. So it's coming out in the US with in North America with Knopf and the UK with Penguin Life. And what the goal was is I tried to follow the arc of a relationship. So in each chapter, I dive into tensions between love and sex. And from the early, I think the first chapter is need, and then what do we want? And then going through the early courtship process, and then forming a relationship, a bonding, what happens with infidelity if someone strays from a relationship, breaking up when relationships dissolve, and then what have the effect of family dynamics. So we looked at single parents, and we looked at the impact of kids on people's romantic and sexual lives. We also looked at, so what I do is I use all these studies that we've done over the last decade and pop them into the different chapters to say, how do we experience this whole life course? Everything from, turns out your pets impact your relationship too. A lot of people, we did a study a few years ago that if you meet someone's dog and the dog doesn't like you, they go, sorry, it was really nice getting to know you. Well, Fluffy said no.
I met the founders of Dig, a dog person's dating app, and they will attest to that. The dogs have their own sixth sense, their intuition.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what the goal for The Intimate Animal is, really to take us through, to take the reader through all the science. And my big goal, I had two big goals for the book. One was to take serious the science of relationships and sexuality and connection and intimacy, because there's this literature we need to leverage and harness in our own lives. And the other was, I am increasingly concerned that we're on the precipice of not taking intimacy seriously. And I think in this pandemic, it's a perfect moment that we need our close connections more than ever. It's one of the reasons why I'll often, when we're talking about social distancing behaviors, we'll often say, well, actually, it's physical distancing, because you need your social relationships more than ever.
Yeah,
right?
that always bothered me, the social distancing, because we're not doing it. It's literally physical distancing.
Yeah.
When can we, is there a launch date? I don't know if you're going to think about a virtual book tour or an actual one.
Yeah.
Is it coming out?
It'll be out. The plan for now is for it to be out in early 2021. So
Okay. Early year. All right. We'll have you back for that then.
Yeah.
On that note,
Uh-huh.
what are your top three what are the top three books that you would recommend to someone read before they enter a serious partnership? I'd love to hear from you what they should be reading, in your opinion.
Oh, there's so many greate books.
I know. Give me, if you have to go 5, we'll go 5. But this is something I want to make sure I've read them all, and maybe I have read some. So go ahead.
Yeah. I think I actually love Helen's a dear friend of mine, but I love Helen's book, Why We Love. Okay. And it's her other book is The Anatomy of Love, which is also fantastic. And she's got several books, but Why We Love, I really like. I've taught with that book. I think because it's the study where she explains putting people who are passionately in love in a brain scanner. And I think it's a great book for us to think about what happens biologically in our brains when we fall in love with someone. And it can help us explain a little bit why we feel the way we do, why we can get so obsessed with someone early in the sort of early limerence period of a passion, and why when they're pulled away, we could feel like the world is crumbling around us. And there's a physiology to that. So I love Why We Love, Helen's book.
Okay.
I think Esther Perel's book, Mating in Captivity, is fantastic. Particularly for people who are thinking about relationships. Her more recent book, State of Affairs, I think for people who are in relationships, but the Mating in Captivity I really enjoy.
What does that mean, the mating in captivity? Where does, I kind of feel like, did she predict the pandemic? What's going on here?
So Esther is a wonderful, very well-known psychotherapist. And what she deals with in that book is thinking about our relationships in the sort of contemporary moment, and how, for a lot of people, we can start to struggle between, we want our partners to both be someone that we feel companionate with, but also be someone we feel passionate about.
Okay.
And that over time, that can become a difficult thing to balance in our relationship.
Okay.
And she's got a remarkable way with words. She's wonderful. And also, both Helen and Esther give great TED Talks you can find online. Okay, let's see. Another one that I'd recommend for.
Have you read, and this one comes up for me because almost every matchmaker says, you must read this. I'd love your opinion.
Yeah.
The book about attachment style, Attached.
Oh, Attached. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Would that be in the reading list?
Yeah, now we're getting up to my top 10 list. Oh my God. Attached is a very good book. And there's a few books that are on attachment.
I'd love to hear, whatever other attachment books, because I think that formulates so much how we choose partners and how we behave. So is there another one that you would recommend?
Attached is a very good one. There's a few. I'm sort of leaning back and looking over at my bookshelf. The thing with attachment is that, and I think with any of these books, is that we have to just sometimes be careful. It's so informative and so helpful for us to think about how we relate to other people, and how the people we're trying to relate to can relate to us. The important thing for relationship scientists is remembering it's dyadic, that there's always two people, there's a dance. So it's both what you're putting out into the world and how others are receiving it, and how you're trying to get what you want from the world. So as you and I talk, I have to think, okay, am I doing what you want? Am I saying what you want? Am I giving words of affirmation that are the ones that you want to hear, or are they ones that I think are the ones that should be said? And it's that dance, always. So I think, but attachment is important, but I worry sometimes that people will say, okay, well, you're avoidantly attached, and that means everything's going to be like this. And
right. Like the whole, like, labeling, that's what actually I wanted to move towards, is we usually seek partners and partnerships that are familiar to us. Can you share with us how someone can break the cycle of toxic partnerships and overall feelings of self-worth? Because I coach so many singles on a daily basis, and they're really conflicted with staying in relationships that don't serve them. Is there something going on psychologically in the brain that has them gravitate towards these relationships that might be familiar because that's the environment they were raised in? How can we break that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons. And so at the Kinsey Institute, one of our research initiatives is a sexual violence research initiative. So we tend to look at the sort of worst cases of problematic relationships that are characterized by domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking. And one of the things that comes out of that research is that I think we have to have a little bit more humility and humanity for people who are in toxic relationships. And often it's so easy to say, hey, that person's bad for you. Hey, he's a jerk. Hey, she's, abusive. And, but that doesn't mean you're not in love with them. And I say that as, poets and philosophers love to, and even some therapists love to tell people, love is a verb. It's an action. It's doing something for someone. And I like that. I agree with that. But it's also fundamentally a little misleading. Yes, it is a verb. Love is an action, but it is also a neuropsychological state of being. And you can absolutely be in love with someone who treats you horribly and is abusive. And I think it's important to recognize that, because we can look at people who are in toxic relationships and sometimes say, well, just get out of it. How do you not see it? Just make them see it. That's not the only issue at stake. The other is that they could be bonded to that person. They could love that person, even though they're not treated well, even if they're abused. And I think so that can happen. And sometimes what happens is people can either go back, so they repeat the cycle, they go back to the same partner. And if you're in love with them, of course you're going to go back to them. In one of our studies, 50% of people have had yo-yo relationships. They go back to someone. And actually in our pandemic study, 1 in 5 people have reached out to an ex since the pandemic.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
And I think actually it's why people need to go to someone like you, right? And have a coach or have someone that can help them think about these issues and to say, hey, here's a bad pattern. How do I get out of it? But not. And it's so easy to feel, the quite part about self-worth. It's so easy for people to say, I can't get out of this. There's something wrong with me. No, there's nothing wrong with you. That's why we need resources. That's why we need coaches. That's why we need hotlines. That's why we need access to people,
absolutely,
to help them.
What's next for you, Justin? And should our lovely people want to connect with you, I did put your that's your Instagram handle at Rev Justin Garcia. Yeah. Where can people reach you, and what's next on your agenda?
Yeah, thanks. So one way is people could follow the Kinsey Institute. We've got on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter. We'll often post a lot of our research studies there. And check out our website. People can look at my individual Instagram. It's great. And that's where that tends to be more when I'm on the road and giving talks and events. And and feel free, people can email me and reach out. Hopefully the book will be out in a few months, so we'll share that with
amazing
folks. And just check out the Kinsey Institute and the research we're up to. We often have things about our continuing education program and videos. We have stories up on Wednesday, for instance, on Instagram. We have a curated art pieces that go up on Wednesday, so a little people can peer into what's in the collection and some of the materials. And we post our scientific articles. So
amazing. And my parting question would be, what's the big lesson for you for 2020 so far?
Oh my gosh. I think
there might be a lot, but what comes up to you? Yeah.
I think the most important thing for me, as a scientist, as a person, as a young professional, I think all of those things is that we need our close relationships more than ever. And right now is, we were saying that physical distancing is a better term before than social distancing. Right now, we need our close relationships, and we've got to take them seriously, whether that's cuddling up with your dog or your kids or your partner, or calling up, someone that you care about just to say, how you doing right now? It's a reminder that we are fundamentally a social species. And our social relationships are not only what make us happy and sad, they're what allow us to thrive psychologically and physiologically. So I think now more than ever, we've got to take serious, cultivating of close relationships in our lives. That doesn't necessarily mean sexual, but it means people you care about. Yes. And maybe they become sexual, but people that you really care about and want in your orbit.
Well, on that note, I'm going to give you a virtual hug and say hello and cheers and thank you. And we'll have you back when you have your book launched. Bye for now. Bye.